All right, so let's dive into John Steinbeck
Okay.
of Mice and Men.
Okay.
You sent over a book review,
Yeah?
some Goodreads opinions,
Uh-huh.
even a blog post.
Oh, wow.
Comparing the book to cartoons?
Interesting.
Should be an interesting mix.
Sounds like it.
So we'll unpack all of that to help you decide if this book is worth your time.
I think it absolutely is.
Oh, good.
Of Mice and Men is one of those books that earns its classic status.
Okay.
It's emotionally powerful, thought-provoking,
Yeah.
and it does all that in just over 100 pages.
That's good to know up front.
Right.
I think a lot of people,
Yeah.
myself included, have kind of put off reading it
I understand that.
because it has a reputation for being, well, sad.
Oh, it definitely pulls at the heartstrings.
Oh.
Our reviewer actually talks about specific scenes.
Oh.
Like well, for instance, there's that moment when George has to tell Lennie to think about the rabbits.
Oh, right.
Right before,
Yeah.
the tragic ending happens. And the reviewer said that just absolutely destroyed them.
Oh, wow.
They were in tears.
Wow.
Steinbeck really
Yeah.
builds a sense of impending doom throughout the whole book.
So it's not just like a slow, sad burn.
No.
There's actual...
No, it's definitely got tension suspense woven into it.
Okay, so the reviewer actually uses the phrase edge of your seat,
Yes, they do.
which I think really captures that.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I think part of that tension comes from the way that Steinbeck writes about George and Lennie's dream of owning a farm. You know, it's this idyllic vision that they're clinging to.
Right.
But every time they talk about it, it just feels further and further out of reach.
So you're saying that we as the reader sense that that dream is doomed
Yes,
from the start.
from the very beginning.
And that adds to the suspense.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that sense of hopelessness is reinforced by the book's central theme of loneliness.
Okay.
There's this quote that really stuck with the reviewer. A guy goes nuts if he ain't got nobody.
Yeah. And the reviewer even mentioned how many of the characters are lonely
Yes.
in different ways.
In different ways, absolutely.
Yeah.
You have Crooks, who's isolated because of his race.
Right.
Lennie with his intellectual disability.
Mm-hmm.
Even George is lonely in a sense. You
Yeah.
know, burdened by his responsibility for Lennie.
Yeah.
The reviewer points out that Steinbeck seems to be saying something about loneliness as a universal human experience.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
But the review also mentions
Uh-huh.
some problems
Yes.
with how women are portrayed.
Right.
Especially Curly's wife.
That's a valid point.
Okay.
A Goodreads reviewer actually deducted stars because of it,
Really?
arguing that Curly's wife is never even given a name,
Oh, wow.
which makes her seem less like a fully realized person.
I can see that.
Yeah.
But wasn't there some nuance to her character, too?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
The reviewer acknowledges that Steinbeck does give Curly's wife some depth. He reveals her backstory,
Okay.
her dreams of a different life.
Right.
And there's this heartbreaking scene where she confides in Lennie
Okay.
about her longing for something more
Mm-hmm.
and the lost opportunities she feels she's had.
Yeah.
So while her portrayal is flawed,
Right.
she's not just a flat stereotype.
Okay, so it's complicated.
It's complicated.
And the Goodreads comments were pretty divided on this, weren't they?
Very much so.
Yeah.
Some felt that Steinbeck was participating in a blame the victim mentality with Curly's wife,
Mm-hmm.
but others saw her as a tragic figure,
Mm-hmm.
trapped by societal expectations.
Yeah, it sounds like Steinbeck was walking a tightrope there.
He was.
But speaking of challenging portrayals,
Yeah.
there were also comments about Lennie's character
Yes.
and the language used to describe him.
Yeah. The word cripple
Right.
is used,
Yeah.
which is obviously jarring to modern readers.
Yeah, for sure.
It's important to remember the historical context.
Right.
Steinbeck was writing in the 1930s, but it's still something we need to acknowledge
Yes.
and discuss.
Absolutely. It's a good reminder that even classics can contain language that we find problematic today.
Exactly.
But before we get too sidetracked,
Sure.
I'm curious about Steinbeck's actual writing style.
Uh-huh.
What makes it so captivating?
Well, one Goodreads user actually compared him to both Stephen King
Wow.
and Elmore Leonard,
That's a wide range.
which is a pretty wide range.
Yeah.
They praise Steinbeck's ability to balance these vivid descriptions with snappy dialogue.
Okay.
For example, remember that description of Lennie we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
The way he's compared to a bear,
Right.
both powerful and clumsy?
Yeah.
It instantly creates a visual
Yeah.
and hints at his tragic fate.
So he's using those descriptions to subtly foreshadow events.
He is.
Okay, that's clever.
Yeah.
But is
It's definitely
Literary fiction
literary fiction.
or something closer to a thriller,
Right.
like some of King's work.
It's definitely literary fiction dealing with those complex themes and characters,
Okay.
but it also has that page-turning quality,
Uh-huh.
that sense of building dread that you might find in a good thriller.
Interesting. And speaking of comparisons,
Yes.
I have to ask about that blog post you mentioned.
Uh-huh.
The one connecting Of Mice and Men to cartoons.
Yes. Yeah, that one's a little more lighthearted,
Okay.
but it makes a surprisingly insightful point.
Hey?
The blog post compares George and Lennie's relationship to Pinky and the Brain.
Wait, really?
Yes.
From Animaniacs.
Right.
I remember that show.
Right.
Like the 90s.
Yeah.
I loved that show.
The writer points out how Brain,
Huh.
the intelligent schemer, is like George in a way.
Okay.
Always trying to keep things under control.
Right, right.
And Pinky,
Yeah.
well-meaning but clueless,
Yeah.
is similar to Lennie,
Huh?
often messing things up despite his good intentions.
That's true.
It's a funny parallel,
Yeah.
but it also highlights the power dynamic
Oh.
and codependency
Right.
at play in George and Lennie's friendship.
Okay, that's actually a pretty clever comparison.
I thought so.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of it, but it makes sense.
Right.
So we've got these complex characters,
Yeah.
thought-provoking themes,
Yeah.
a bit of suspense,
Yeah.
even some humor thrown in.
A little bit. Yeah.
It does sound like a worthwhile read,
I think so.
but I'm still a little hesitant
I understand.
about the emotional aspect.
Right.
The reviewer mentioned crying,
Yes.
and I'm not always in the mood for a tearjerker.
I hear you. It's definitely an emotional book,
Yeah.
but that's also part of its power.
Okay.
The reviewer talks about how Steinbeck doesn't shy away from the harsh realities of life,
Mm-hmm.
especially for those on the margins of society,
Right.
like those migrant workers during the Depression,
Yeah.
constantly moving from place to place, never really able to settle down.
It makes their dream of having a farm even more poignant,
Absolutely.
knowing that it represents more than just land.
Yep.
It's about finding a place to belong.
Exactly. And that longing for belonging resonates with readers even today.
Yeah.
I mean, we all crave connection, a
Mhm.
purpose, a place where we feel at home.
Right.
But as Steinbeck shows us, those things are often elusive.
That quote, a guy goes nuts if he ain't got nobody keeps coming back to me.
It's powerful.
It's so simple, but
Mhm.
so profound.
Yes.
And it applies to more than just George and Lennie, right?
Absolutely.
Like take Crooks, for example.
Right.
He's isolated, not just because of his race,
Right.
but because he's disabled.
Yeah, the reviewer points out how his physical limitations are
Yeah.
constantly used against him,
Yeah.
further isolating him from
Yeah.
the other workers.
It's heartbreaking, really.
It is.
And even though the book was written almost a century ago,
Uh-huh.
that sense of isolation and otherness still feels relevant today.
Absolutely. Of Mice and Men tackles universal themes that transcend time and place.
Mm-hmm.
It's about friendship,
Yeah,
loyalty,
right.
the search for belonging, the struggle against societal forces that seek to divide us.
Right.
And those are themes that will always be relevant, unfortunately.
So while it's not a feel-good story,
No.
it does seem like a valuable read,
Yeah.
something that will stay with you.
It forces you to confront uncomfortable truths about humanity,
Okay.
about the ways we treat each other,
Right.
about the systems that create inequality and suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And it does all that with remarkable economy of language.
The review did praise Steinbeck's writing.
Yes.
I guess I just pictured something more flowery,
I see.
given that it's a classic.
It's actually quite the opposite.
Okay.
Steinbeck's prose is deceptively simple,
Uh-huh.
yet incredibly powerful.
Okay.
He has this knack for creating vivid images
Mm-hmm.
and evoking strong emotions with just a few well-chosen words.
Yeah.
Like that description of Curly's wife where he writes, "She had full rouged lips and wide-spaced eyes, heavily made up. Her fingernails were red. Her hair hung in little rolled clusters like sausages. She wore a cotton house dress and red slippers."
Wow, that's powerful.
Right?
I'm starting to get a sense of why this book has resonated with so many people for so long.
I think so.
Yeah.
It's a book that stays with you.
Okay.
The reviewer actually compares the emotional impact
Mm.
to books like To Kill a Mockingbird or The Book Thief.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I read To Kill a Mockingbird a few years ago,
Mm.
and I still think about it sometimes.
Right.
Okay, you've convinced me.
Good.
Of Mice and Men is going on my reading list.
Excellent.
But since I'm already preparing myself for the emotional roller coaster,
Yeah.
Any other books I should add while I'm at it?
Well, if you're looking for books that explore similar themes
Okay.
of friendship and hardship,
Mm-hmm.
but in a different setting,
Okay.
The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini is a powerful read.
Okay.
It's set in Afghanistan
Damn.
and deals with those complex social issues
Okay.
and the bonds of friendship amidst conflict.
Yeah, I've heard great things about that one. I'll
Yeah.
definitely add that to the list.
Yeah.
Anything else?
If you want to stick with Steinbeck,
Okay.
The Grapes of Wrath is another classic
Okay.
that tackles social issues,
Right.
this time focusing on the plight of migrant workers during the Dust Bowl.
Okay.
It's a longer read,
Right.
but equally impactful.
Noted. I'm trying to branch out a bit.
Okay,
So maybe something a little less bleak.
sure.
I do enjoy a good story with some hope mixed in.
I understand. In that case, I might recommend A Tree Grows in Brooklyn
Oh, okay.
by Betty Smith.
Okay.
It's a coming-of-age story set in poverty-stricken Brooklyn
Oh, wow.
in the early 1900s.
Right.
It definitely has its share of hardship, but it's ultimately a story about resilience and the power of hope.
That sounds right up my alley. I'll check it out.
Great.
Okay, I think I'm all set for my next book haul.
Excellent.
Thanks for all the insights.
You're welcome. I'm glad we could help you make a decision about Of Mice and Men.
Yep.
It's a book that deserves to be read
Mm-hmm.
and discussed, even if it's not always an easy experience.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, if Of Mice and Men sounds like something you'd be interested in, we encourage you to pick up a copy and dive in.
And if you've already read it,
Right.
we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
What resonated with you? What did you find challenging?
You can find us on all the usual social media platforms.
Right.
We're always up for a good book discussion.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Mice and Men.
Until next time, happy reading.